Hey everybody, it's TubbyTotodile, and I love collecting things. I collect records, and I collect plushies, and I love collecting things. So, from this point onwards, I refuse to play any games that don't have 3,400 or more collectibles in them. So, what games do we have left? Oh shit. Donkey Kong 64 is quite something. Being hailed as the ender of the collectathon, DK64 is a really ambitious game. Having all the work helmed by Nintendo besties Rareware, who had previously done killer work on the Donkey Kong Country franchise, it was safe to say Donkey Kong 64 was in safe hands. But, despite being in good hands, the game was coming out in a transitioning of hardware and saw some setbacks. Now before we dive too deep into it, let's talk about Rare. I'm sure a lot of you are aware of who Rare is, but as a quick refresher, Rareware is the incredible team behind Donkey Kong Country. They'd created other titles previously like Battletoads and Slalom, but I really want to focus on the DKC series because that's really what helped throw them into the lexicon. Utilizing the SGI, or Silicon Graphics Systems, the team behind Donkey Kong Country were able to pull off some incredible 3D visuals on the SNES. This led to the game being a wild hit, and in return merited 2 sequels that would utilize the same advanced visuals. And it made it clear to Nintendo that they had found a good dev team to consistently work on Donkey Kong. So why is this important, I'm sure you're asking? Well, it's important because it kind of sets up the groundwork and the perspective and the pressure on Rareware to really follow up for a 4th time utilizing Nintendo's IP. And with Nintendo making its full debut into the 3D-verse with the Nintendo 64 coming out in September of '96, that meant the team was transitioning into different hardware and different specs that they had never used before. Luckily for everyone though, Nintendo released a Nintendo 64 with Mario 64, and that really was the blueprint for how 3D platforming could be achieved at the time. Rare took a lot of inspiration from Nintendo's leap into 3D, and they began reworking a title that they had originally called Dreams into something a little bit more similar to Mario 64.
What was that game? What was that game?
I don't know. I guess it didn't do well.
I can't even think of what that game is though. What's that game?
Yeah, no. They created fucking Banjo-Kazooie, who has become a gaming icon. And Banjo really set up the framework for where Rareware would kind of start taking their adventures in 3D. Conker's Bad Fur Day, Banjo-Tooie, and yeah, Donkey Kong 64. See, early 3D was sort of a tough cookie to crack. It was utilizing this incredibly new extra dimension that developers didn't necessarily have to consider working on their previous titles. So when you found something that worked in 3D, it made a lot of sense to expand upon that. And with Banjo, it seems Rareware found what worked was exploring and collecting things. This is what I think changed the trajectory for Donkey Kong 64's development, because prior to this, it was in development for like 18 months, and it was in development as a 2.5D style game, very similar to the Donkey Kong Country series. But after that 18 months in development, something changed, and the game seems to have made a change from being that into being what we know today. But with Donkey Kong 64, they did scale it up. There were 5 playable Kongs, and they all had their own unique pickups, and they all had their own unique puzzles, and they all had their own unique abilities. It was a lot. It was a lot. And it's especially a lot when you consider that the Nintendo 64 only had 4 megabytes of RAM, which at the time was a lot, but now is pretty laughable. Donkey Kong 64 was actually one of 3 games that was bundled with the expansion pack. The Nintendo 64 expansion pack doubled the amount of RAM on the Nintendo 64, giving that mama 8 megs of RAM. Now, why did Donkey Kong need the expansion pack? Was it because it really was a big game, or... According to Chris Marlowe, a developer for Rare and also the voice behind the Great Mighty Pooh, Donkey Kong 64 faced a very serious game-breaking bug, and the only fix for it was the 4 megabyte expansion pack. But, on the contrary, Mark Stevenson of Rare recently did an interview with Nintendo Life celebrating the 20th anniversary of Donkey Kong 64. In that interview, he states, "There was a game-breaking bug right at the end of development that we were struggling with, but the expansion pack was not introduced to deal with this, and it was not the solution to the problem. My memory is that Like all consoles, the hardware is constantly revised over its lifetime to take advantage of ongoing improvements in technology and manufacture methods to essentially make the manufacture more cost-effective and eventually profitable. I think there were something like 3 different revisions of the internal hardware by this point, and the bug was only unique to one of these versions. We did eventually find it and fix it, but very late in the day. There have been more interviews coming out lately because of Donkey Kong having its 64th, what the fuck? Having its 20th birthday. And if you want to see more about the expansion pack, Stop Skeletons from Fighting has a really awesome video about the expansion pack and its usage, and I super recommend you check that out. Very informative. But the fact of the matter is, no matter what, Donkey Kong 64 was pretty beefy, and no matter what, Donkey Kong 64 was going to come with this additional RAM. Working on a big game and working with additional specs, especially considering that the Nintendo 64 had the expansion pack and it also had the failed disk drive that required the expansion pack. So all these specs basically means more hands on deck. From what I understand, coming off of work for Banjo-Kazooie, George Andreas was added to the Donkey Kong 64 team as creative director. Banjo-Kazooie had a lot of great things about it, says Andreas. So one of the first things Tim Stamper, Rare's co-founder, told me was make sure there's lots to collect. I'd always go back to him and say, here's some. And he'd go, no, more. We had to make it as much of a collectathon as possible to help kind of differentiate it. That quote from George Andreas should really give you an idea of the mantra that they had for Donkey Kong within Rare. Bigger, better, more power-ups, more puzzles, just more. And with that mantra, the team behind Donkey Kong 64, whether they be experienced with 3D or not, worked really, really hard to make sure that levels were big, and that the collectibles were aplenty and fun to collect, and to make sure that all the Kongs served a purpose in the story. They all come together at the end and fight K. Rool in this really wickedly cool, like, boxing battle, and all the Kong's abilities are utilized, and it's so cool. But if Bethesda's really taught us anything over time, ambition and size can lead to problems. And problems Donkey Kong 64 has. Releasing November 2nd, 1999, oh my god, I was just fucking like 4 years old. Donkey Kong 64 was a hit with pretty much universal acclaim. There was a constant gripe about having to backtrack, and a lot of people did not like the Donkey Kong rap, but other than that, the game was doing really good upon release. But as time went on, and on, and on, and on, and on, and on, as it so does, more and more was discovered about what a mess this game actually was. But personally, I think that's really harsh for Donkey Kong 64. I got my nostalgia blinders on for sure, but a lot of games at this time kind of released with problems. And I really think Donkey Kong gets pegged more easily just because it's so easy to be like, let's all point and laugh at the stupid ape, ha 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 ha. I don't know, that's just my opinion though, cause like I said, I got those nostalgia blinders. But anyway, Donkey Kong 64 turned 20 this year. Amazing! And its legacy will always live on. The Donkey Kong rap, the absurd number of collectibles. And recently, some really cool articles have come out talking with the dev team about things that we might not have known, or just their experiences within development while working on this game. There's one that I mentioned earlier in the video by Games Radar, where they discuss a lot of cool things from usage of the Nintendo 64 expansion pack to the first time that they accidentally showed the placeholding real guns texture to Shigeru Miyamoto. Really cool article, I'll leave the link in my description because there's a lot of cool things to read there. But it really just warms me. It warms me so much to know that there's this weird resurgence in the game, and the opinion on it isn't so foul anymore. Or, well, we understand that it's good bad. You know, we love it for all the bad things about it. It's good because it is bad. And for me personally, I will always remember this game. This game, like, lives within my family. There's a story from when my dad beat the final boss for the very first time, and everyone was so hype about it, and that story still lives on in my family, and clearly Donkey Kong 64 still lives on in the hearts of many, many people. No amounts of bugs or glitches or corny 90s rap could squander that for me either. Happy birthday. Happy 20th birthday, Donkey Kong 64. And thanks for watching. Till next time, Cranky, take it to the fridge.
Here we go.